Finally, we can improve our listening competence by becoming better contextual listeners. Understanding the role that listening plays in professional, relational, cultural, and gendered contexts can help us to more competently apply these listening skills. Let's talk first about listening in professional contexts. It may surprise you that empathetic listening and active listening can play key roles in organizational communication. For example, managers are wise to enhance their empathetic listening skills because this can lead to positive climates in the workplace. And positive listening environments are perceived as being more employee-centered, which can improve job satisfaction and cohesion in the workplace. In addition, we can work to improve our listening in relational contexts. As we know, listening plays a central role in establishing and maintaining our relationships. Without some listening competence, we wouldn't be able to engage in self-disclosure processes, for example. Listening is a natural part of the give and take of any interpersonal relationship. It demonstrates to our partner that we are interested in their lives. Additionally, parents who engage in competent listening behaviors with their children from a very young age can make their children feel worthwhile and appreciated. So listening can be very important in our relational contexts. In addition, it's important for us to recognize the relationship that exists between listening and culture. Some cultures place more importance on listening than other cultures do. For example, collectivistic cultures tend to value listening more than individualistic cultures that tend to be more speaker-oriented. Generally speaking, collectivistic cultures tend to care about the larger group or the other, which is why it makes sense that they value listening more than individualistic cultures, which focus on you and yourself. Additionally, whether a speaker comes from a low context or high context culture will impact the way that a listener perceives the message. So a low context communication style is one in which much of the meaning that is generated within an interaction comes strictly from the verbal communication that is used, rather than coming from other nonverbal or contextual clues. Generally speaking, U.S. Americans of European descent tend to use low context communication. And they have to provide more verbal communication and provide explicit details because listeners aren't expected in low context cultures to derive meaning from context. On the other hand, much of the meaning generated by high context communication style comes from nonverbal and contextual cues. Generally speaking, East Asian and Latin American cultures tend to use high context communication. In this case, less verbal communication, there is less context, less meaning that is pulled from verbal communication, and these cultures value silence as a form of communication as well. So people who come from low context cultures might feel frustrated by the ambiguity of speakers from high context cultures. And listeners from high context cultures might feel overwhelmed or even insulted by the level of detail used by low context communicators. So as you can see, culture plays an important role in how we both send and listen to messages. And finally, let's take a look at the relationship between listening and gender. You've probably heard a lot of ideas about gender and listening. You've likely heard that women tend to be better listeners than men, or that men tend to interrupt women more than women tend to interrupt the other speakers. And unfortunately, a lot of the research on gender differences and communication has been influenced by gender stereotypes. So a lot of what we, quote, understand to be the differences between listening and gender don't actually exist on the level that we expect them to. A lot of these expectations are fueled by these stereotypes and these generalizations that aren't going to necessarily be true in all cases. So, in order to improve our listening competence, we have to understand the context that surrounds the message. We have to improve our listening in professional contexts, relational contexts, cultural contexts, and gender contexts.